Welcome back. This is Dan Havey with CF Ninja Hacks. And the other day I was going through some of Doug Boughton's training on ClickFunnels, and I came across his custom CSS training. Now, something that Doug makes very clear is that he is not a coder of any sort. He just goes out onto the internet, he finds some code, he puts it into his site, and hopefully it'll work. And then he'll maybe change it a little bit, manipulate it a little bit. But one thing I will tell everyone is there's nothing wrong with that. You're not going to break your site. The only thing I would say is if you do go find somebody else's code, do a little bit of research and find out, does it really work? Why does it work? And just be careful with it. And in my case here, I think you're always better off to come and ask somebody like myself if this is the proper kind of code, because I know in my case, a lot of times I'll just give somebody a little snippet of code and it'll fix it up, which is what I'm going to do here very shortly. But so, like I said, it's okay to go out and find it, but just make sure you know what you're doing. The other thing I definitely want to tell people to do is that if you ever get a share funnel from somebody, make sure you go in, and I'll show you what to do here. Make sure you go in and you check to see what is in the tracking code, the footer and the header tracking code, and then also go in and see what is in the custom CSS. Because more often than not, when I'm working with somebody and they say, hey, I got this problem with my site, I ask them, was it a template? And they'll say yes, and I go, have you checked to see what's in the CSS and the tracking code? And they never went in there. So the problem they're experiencing on the page is actually being caused by the code that is in the CSS or the tracking code. And so they're like trying to change a button color to blue, and the CSS says, no, make it green. And so they're trying to override it, and they can't figure it out. And a lot of times I've actually seen with some of these share funnels you get from ClickFunnels is they've just got bad code in them. Because when you're out there on the interwebs and you find somebody else's code, you assume that the person who put that code in there knew what they were doing. Well, they could have been somebody who got it from somebody who got it from somebody who may not have been a very good coder in the first place. And by the time you get it, it's like playing telephone, and this thing is so broken, it shouldn't be on your page in the first place. So let's just take a look at what Doug had for his code here. So he had like, what do we got here? 7, 8 different ones. And I'm going to go through the way I would fix each one of these up. But the first thing I want to talk about is using the proper syntax for your CSS. This up here that he's got here, this is pretty close. So this is pretty close to how you want it to look. And then down here is a great example of how you don't want it to look, where you have all of the entire definition all in one line. So let's take a look at what CSS should look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a little bookmark that I have, and you're going to see me doing a bunch of crazy stuff on the screen here that you will not have the ability to do, but we're going to just move this around a little bit. So let's take a look at how you should really set up your CSS and what you should make it look like. So this entire thing here is known as a rule set. Okay, inside of a rule set, you have 3 main components. You have right here, this is known as the selector. So this tells what element within the HTML do we want to apply this little bit of CSS to. Then down here, we have what is called the declaration, which is made up of 2 parts. The property here on the left, and the value on the right-hand side. And you're going to notice here you have the selector on the first line, you have a space, then you have a little left curly bracket, then you put in your declaration, and then below it here is you put in your right curly bracket. So you don't want to do it all in one line. You also don't want to do it like this. I've seen people do it that way as well. But according to everyone that I've found, including Mozilla, they say that this is the proper syntax for setting up your CSS. So let's take a look at what Doug had for the first one. And what he had here is image button pop on hover. So on his, let me just pull it down here, because what I did is I mocked up both his and mine in many of these cases here. So on his, when you come in here, and you're going to see it's really kind of clunky, and if you watch his videos, you're going to see the thing just kind of pops all over the place. And as I move on and off, you're going to see the reason why is you can see the orange line around the outside here. And actually, let's do this. Let's save this and let's preview this page. So this will be a better way to show you. So I'm going to right click on here. I'm going to inspect this element. And we're going to come in here and we're going to, this is the outer part of the image itself. Now, most of these elements inside of ClickFunnels are made up of multiple layers of elements inside of elements. Well, here we have basically the image wrapper, as it says. So we have the image wrapper and then we have the actual image inside of it. So as I hover over the image, you can see just the image itself turns that light bluish color. But when I come over the image wrapper, it actually extends way out beyond the edges. And so in a case like this, we want to target the image itself, the part on the inside, not the entire image wrapper on the outside. So as we come in here, you're going to see as I come into that image wrapper, as I come into the edge here, let me see if I can get it to highlight it as I'm doing this. I don't think I can. But as I come in from the side, at that point there, I hit the image wrapper and it starts to trigger this already. But if I come in from the top, because there is no wrapper around the top, I go straight to the image itself. And what it does then is it pops out to 125%, and then it's supposed to go down to like 92%, 95%, 90%, I guess, right here, which it doesn't really do that. And part of the reason why is he's got the code kind of backwards here. So he's saying here is this is the element itself. So this is the wrapper of the element. This is the CSS ID selector for that wrapper, and I can show you that right here. So there's the CSS ID selector for that. And what he's saying is when you hover on that wrapper, what this actually says by putting the word, the IMG, the image afterwards, it's saying that as you hover on the wrapper, make the image 125%. So as we come in from the side, we hit the wrapper and it goes to 125%. And then as you pull off, it goes to the 0.9, and I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not quite sure how that is working and making it do that, because it does seem to get smaller than what it would be natively as you pull off. Because here then it's saying, as again you're on hover, it's saying to make it 90%. So like I said, it's got a weird effect too. So that's not the way I would definitely do it. Then down here we have transition transform of 0.45 seconds. So it's going to do it in basically slightly under half a second, and it's going to ease, which means ease in and then ease out at the end. Well, ease in out like that is the default. So we don't need the default there. And in fact, we don't need the word transform either to have the exact same effect. So it'll do the exact same thing. So the way I fix this up is I said, and I guess we can just leave it here so you can still see Doug's. What I said here is we got our CSS ID selector for this element right here. And then I say on the image. So we're only going to be looking at the image, not the element itself. And I'm giving it a transition of 5 seconds. And the reason why I'm doing that is because we're going to blow it up to 125% over half a second. But if we don't put in this other transition here, and I'll put a little slash there to kill the code, what you'll see is it gets big and then it just slaps shut. So it's like, boom, it takes half a second, and then boom, it just is gone. So you want to put the transition on both ends of the hover so that it goes in and out on a nice smooth cycle like that. Now, for me, I prefer really more like about 1.5, and so then we can just do that, and just so it gives you just a slight enlargement as you hover over the image. And again, here we got a transition of half a second. So now what you saw me do earlier is I put this little slash here. Now this is not a way to comment out code. So do not ever put in what you think is a comment like this and then give it to somebody who you're selling it to or whatever. But as you're working in the code, if you put in that little slash, what it does is it's a syntax error, and so it kills the line of code. So like I said, it's okay for testing, but never go into production, never give it to a client with those slashes in there like that. Now, the next bit of code that Doug had was to do a full width section. So let's take a look at that here. Let me scroll it up to the top. So we got a full width section. So he has the, let me put a space there. He has the section ID, and again, if you don't know how to do that, we're using the top section, I do believe, on this one. So you come up, you click on the gear, hashtag, you grab the CSS ID selector. Now, there are other ways to select an element. There are other selectors other than the ID selector. In this case, because it has a hashtag in the beginning of it, that indicates that it is an ID. You can also have class selectors and attribute selectors, but that, again, is for another time. So here we got our 62002. So we'll close that. So we got our 62002 here, and we got space container inner. Now, how this works is quite simple. So let's come up here and we will find a container right here. And one of the things I will tell you is that ClickFunnels is built on Bootstrap. And Bootstrap was a programming framework, I guess would be the right word, designed by Twitter in order to make sites more, mobile responsive. So it makes them work much better on mobile. And one of the things you're going to see right here is we have a class of container. Well, that right there alone, the class of container and this class of row right here will tell you immediately that this was built on Bootstrap. And what Bootstrap is it divides the page up into 12 columns. So you got 12 different columns on the page, and in between each one of these columns is what is known as a gutter. So think of like working in Word or something like that. You can put a gutter on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side of a document. I think that's normally used if you're going to bind them together on the edges so that everything moves in a little bit so that it doesn't get caught up into the binding so you can continue to read it. And so that's what you have here is you have gutters between each of these elements, and the sizes of the elements, sizes of the columns to be exact, is determined by how many different columns you have. Well, in the case of ClickFunnels here, is you have, and let me get out of there because that's just going to bebop around. So in the case of ClickFunnels, you will have, now I'm going to have to stay up here. You have a situation where there's a line right over here on the edge. This does not go all the way out to the edge. So what we want to say is we want this to go to 100% width. So we're going to come down to our container inner element right here, and we can see right now it has a width of 1170 pixels. But the container itself has a width of 100% right down here. So our code is going to say that we want to take this element, the container inner, which we said was 1170 pixels, and we want to say we want this to have a width of 100%. Now, here, let me just turn that back off again for a second. So width of 100%. So you can see it goes all the way out to the edges then. I should have colorized the background on this so you can see a little bit better, but it does spread everything out on the page. Now, what it's really saying here is width of 100%, but 100% of what? It's 100% of its bounding element. So what this element is inside of is the container. So we're targeting the container inner, which had 1170 pixels, wherever the heck that went to. Here it is. And then we're saying that we want this to not be 1170 pixels. We want it to be 100% the width of its bounding element, which is this container element right there. And that's why this works. Now, one other thing Doug had on here is he had a height of 100%. You don't need that because, again, that would be saying give us a height of 100% of the bounding element, but it's already 100% of the bounding element, so it doesn't do anything anyway. So you could just completely take that out and not have to worry about it. So we'll turn that one on, and we'll turn this one off by creating that syntax error. Again, don't leave those in. Okay, so now we're moving elements on the XY axis. And so we're going to come down into here, and what we're going to do is we're going to move these elements left and right. So these images here, in the case of Doug, he had one with an arrow on it, and so he wanted basically to come over here and have the arrow kind of like point into the other image. So what he did is he came in, this was his code up here at the top, and so what he did is he came in and he said, okay, we want to make this 80 pixels. And by doing that, he's taking the entire image element again. And let's go back into one of these elements and let's right click and let's inspect it, because we're going to have the exact same thing as we had before. We have our image wrapper and then we have our image on the inside. So he's saying take the entirety of the image wrapper, and what we got here is margin of 0, 80 pixels, and 0. Well, how margin works is very simple. Let me just show it to you down here. So here we have 4 different elements in our margin setting. And these could be broken down. You could do margin left, margin right, a lot of other things. But the basic old original way of doing it is margin. And you see here there's four different items right here. So you start off with margin top, margin right, margin bottom, and margin left. And I know my hand is going in the exact opposite direction of what you're seeing it here. So top, right, bottom, left. So just think of a clock. So top, right, bottom, left. So in this case here, because we only have 3 of the 4, this is one of the ways of doing shorthand on this. You would have 0 pixels at the top, you would have 80 pixels right and left, and 0 pixels at the bottom. That is exactly what his code said. And so what it's doing is you got your element here, but then it's putting 80 pixels of margin on either side. And we're not targeting the image, we are targeting the image wrapper. So what we want to do is target the image. And so what we're going to do is we'll come down to the bottom, and I can leave that one alone. Oh, and by the way, this line of code here does absolutely nothing, and this line of code here does nothing as well. And this really should have a semicolon at the end. You should always have semicolons at the end of everything. I know technically if it's the last one inside of the declaration, it doesn't matter, but just for good, safe housekeeping, just put a semicolon at the end of it. So what we're going to look at here is my version of this. So let's take this off and let's just go margin left of minus 90 pixels. And so it moved over exactly the way Doug wanted his to move over. Now let's just make this 290 pixels. And you're going to see that this image is over the top of the one to the left of it. Generally speaking, how it works is whatever element is lower down in the code, it will always be on top of the element that is above it. So in this case here, because we have, let me see, so here we got one image here, and then right above it we'll have another image up here. Because one is lower in the code than the other one, the lower one will always go over the top of the upper one. I said always. I'm sure there's a corner case where it doesn't work that way, but most of the time that is what you are going to see. So in this case here, we can make this, put it back to our minus 90 pixels. Now, again, let's kill that code and let's open this back up. So again, here we got top, right, bottom, left. So let's just say we want to go 100 pixels. 100 pixels top. And let's take this out because I'm looking at it and going, why is that in the wrong place? So we're going to say 100 pixels now down from the top. So margin is always the area from the element that is bounding it down to, in this case, because we're doing top, down to the top of the image in this case. Because again, here we are adding in the dot or the IMG, which says do it to the image, not to the wrapper. So the wrapper is our bounding element. The image is inside of it. We're saying come down 100 pixels from the top of that bounding element, that wrapper. So we're 100 pixels down from the top. So let's turn that off. Now let's say we want to come in 100 from the right. And I'm going to tell you, some of these don't work the way you think they should. So you got to kind of play around with it. In some cases here, you might want to do right margin on it, and you find out that really you need to use negative left margin in order to get it to go the direction you want. But once you understand how these things work, you can start putting in stuff. Like in this case here, I just put in 1,000 right pixels, so that should mean that it should move this way away from the edge by 1,000 pixels, and it didn't move a bit. But if we come over here to the other end of it and we put in minus 100 or at minus 1000, that's a little far, minus 100 pixels, it moved it over to the left, which is what we wanted. So negative left margin is the equivalent of positive right margin in most cases. Again, I'm sure there's some corner cases where that would not be true. And then another case here is the third one of the elements here is going to be our bottom margin. So if we put in 100 bottom margin, you're going to see what it does here is it doesn't move it up at all. It just moves it down, or it moves the bottom of the row, actually, because actually it would be the bottom again of that wrapper element is moving that down by 100 pixels, which then forces the row down and the section down as well. So that's one way you can put space underneath elements, is by using a positive bottom number there. And now let's see what happens when we put in the negative sign. Doesn't do anything. In fact, it really just kills what we had. So let's take that out. But again, if we want to move that element down, we put in 100 pixels moved it up, whereas a negative 100 moved it up, whereas a positive 100 will move it down. So like I said, I'm sure there's a very good reason for it. I would have to do a little bit more experimentation, even especially go into the center columns and try moving them left and right to get a better understanding. But the whole point is that you can come in here, you can start moving those numbers around, and you can get the element to move where you want, or you can even create space underneath the element by using the bottom padding on that. So let's clean this up a little bit, and we will move on to the next section. Okay, and the next one here, Doug showed us how to put in a shadow around a section. This could also be used around a row, and we're going to show how to do it around a column, and of course even around an image. So you can use these box shadows around anything you want to put an image around. So in this case here, let's just go over here and unkill the code, and you saw right there, I'll just put it back in. You see we have a nice big shadow around there. And if you're wondering what this light blue is in the background, that is the background color of the site. I put that in there for something we're going to show down here in a minute. And so now we have our box shadow. So let's take a look at how this works. So the first number is always going to be your x-axis, your horizontal, or in the case of like images, it's going to be the width of the image. So again, x, horizontal, and width. The next number is y, which is vertical, and also the height of an object. And then we have blur and then spread after that. So let's take out the blur and show you what we have if we just have our 10 pixels and 10 pixels. So the 10 pixels horizontally, you can see, goes off the right-hand side over here. And if we make this a negative number, of course, it'll go off the left-hand side. And then we could do the same thing, make a negative number on the y-axis, and it will pull it up to the top. So now it's at the top and the left-hand side. And then let's say here we want to put in some blur. And so as you see there, it just starts to get a little bit blurry. And let's say we put in 100. And you're going to see once you do that, then it starts going around the entirety of the image. Once you get out past about 10 or so, you're going to start seeing that coming down around the entirety of the image. And then we can come over here to spread, and spread just kind of makes it even bigger. So I just put in 40, let's put in 10, 20, 30. Do a little research. I mean, I don't use box shadows too much, but you might want to check into exactly what the spread does. Most of the time, you'll see the spread pretty much set at 0. So again, here in this case here, we go back to our 10, 10, 87. I guess I had 870 in there when I've been messing around this so much. So let's go 87, and that's what it would look like straight out of the box. Now you're going to see here that I got the WebKit and the Moz. I have those ticked off to kill that code. And for the most part, what that is that for old browsers. So old Internet Explorer and old Mozilla or Firefox. And for the most part, you're really seeing the guy has not put that in anymore, because all the modern browsers support everything. And you got to go way back to have browsers not support something like Box Shadow. So for the most part, you don't need to put in the WebKit or the Moz, and there's something else for Opera. But for the most part, you don't need to put those in anymore. So now we have a column shadow, and let me just turn this off because I forget which column I did that on. I guess I was up here at the top. All right, so let me turn that back on for a second. So now you're going to see here, again, we got the same thing, because on this top element, we have the entirety of the, you see the orange around here, we have the wrapper for that image. So it's going to go all the way around here, and it's going to look funny. We're not really wrapping the column at this point. We're wrapping that the image wrapper. So what can we do here? So let's come into our column. There's a couple different things we can do. So let's look at our column, and we're going to say here, we can try moving our left and our right around. Well, that's not going to work. Let's try doing our top padding and bringing that to 0 or up to 100. Well, we could do this. We could do a bunch of padding like that, and it gives us the effect, but we still, we're still not really around it the way I would like to be. And so let's take a look at this, and we can come into our advanced, and we can look at our side margins, and we can bring our side margins down to 0, and let's bring our settings for our left and right, and this is not wanting to work right for me now. What should have happened, I think, is that, yeah, maybe not, because I made this full width. It should have pulled it all the way into the sides here, but that's okay, because we got another way of doing this, and the best way to do this actually is to do it directly around the image. So in this case here, I'm doing it around this image, and so let's take that out, and now you see the image there. Let me just make this a little darker around there, and make these both a little bit bigger. So now you can see a little bit, and especially when I blow it up like this, you can now see that around there. So this is much more effective if you were trying to do it just on the image. Here, again, there's always going to be issues with the sizing of the wrappers on images and other stuff, because like I said, all the elements inside of ClickFunnels, it's not just ClickFunnels, every builder has elements inside elements inside elements, and so it gets really tough sometimes to figure out exactly how you want to target something to get it to look the way you want. Okay, so now the next one here is black and white to color images. Let me pull this up a little bit. And so what he had is he has an image on the screen, and I got mine down here. And what you want to do with this image is have it start off as black and white, and when you hover over it, you want it to become colorized. Well, I can tell you right now that his code that he's using here, again, he got it from somebody else. He just cut and paste. His code doesn't work really at all. I mean, it works when he shows it in the video, and the reason why it works is because he's got this right here. He's got image, and he's got image hover. And what this did is it put that CSS onto every single image on the page. So if you got 15 images on the page, by just saying image without any other selector before it, it's going to do it to every single image on the page. Now, in some cases, you may want that. You may want every image to be black and white and then become colorized on hover. But generally speaking, that's not going to be what you want. And so, again, this is not an effective way of doing it. This code up here actually makes the image smaller, and I just put in the image the size I wanted it to. You can, of course, come in and tell it how big you want it to be. Let's just say we want it 500 pixels, and then otherwise it's going to be centered right in the middle of this row that I created, because, again, also I said on advanced here, let's make it center. We could make it right or wherever. And so if you do want to move the image around, this is a way of doing it, but in this case, I did not want to. This div right here, this again, this would target every single div on the page. And you can see here is div, 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 div. So all of these are divs or divisions or dividers. I'm not even really quite sure what div stands for. So this does it to every single thing on the page. The reason why it didn't break anything is because all it's saying here is give us a margin of 0 and auto. So again, as we said, we got the 4 different sides for our margins. So in this case here is margin of 0, so 0 top, 0 bottom, so it doesn't move it at all up and down. And then on the sides, by putting in auto, it says whatever room we have that is basically not the image itself, we want to divide that in half and put equal amounts on either side. So what it's doing is essentially saying is center every single div on the page. Well, again, natively, everyone will already be centered. So this code doesn't do anything either. And then, like I've already said, the IMG, the image, would do it for every single one on the page. Now, here's the easy way to accomplish what Doug has here in all these many lines is you come into your image. So we want to go black and white to color. So we come into the image and we go to advanced and we come down here and we tell it to be black and white. So there we got rid of what is known as, well, we went to 100% grayscale is what we did at this point. And now we say, okay, now when we hover on this image, so it's not all the images, it's the image specifically inside of this image wrapper. When we hover on that image, we want the grayscale to go to 0. Okay, so grayscale of 0 would be colorized. So as we come in and we hover over it, it becomes colorized. Just like that. Now you could do it the other way around. Let's say you wanted to start off with colorized. So we go color, and then when we hover over it, we want to go to grayscale. Well, we just change the grayscale down here to 1, and then as we hover over it, it turns gray right there. So that's that. So now we got angled sections, and then we are going to be done. I think I've hit all the highlights that I wanted to. So with angled sections, again, Doug showed it, so we got a little bit of a peak at the top here. So actually, let me turn on that. And again, we got a WebKit there, which we don't need that. But we're going to do what is known as a clip path polygon. You can do clip path circles, ellipses. I think there's another one besides polygon. I don't use these too terribly often, but a polygon is basically, if you remember your old geometry, it's basically a shape with, well, more than 4 sides, I guess. Yeah, it'd have to be. So it'd be like 5 or more sides, not including an octagon or something like that. And especially in a case like that where the angles are not all symmetrical. So like if you had an octagon, all of the angles in there, I think it would be 12.5 degrees or something like that. So either way, what this does is you saw here, it just puts that little peak at the top. And so we can take that back out, or we can put that back in. So now we got that little peak at the top. And how a clip path polygon works, or how a polygon works, is, I'll roll this up a little bit, is it looks at the shape of the section. In this case, we're doing it on a section. You could do it on a row. I'm pretty sure you could do it on just about anything, even including an image. But it's going to take that section, which again is essentially going to be a rectangle, and it's going to say, okay, we need to make the boundaries of this rectangle a little bit different than what we started with. So in this case here, it says we want to start at a point of 0 and 5%. Instead of 5% here, you could put in pixels too, I do believe. Let's just see here. So 5 pixels. Let's make that 50 pixels just to see. Oops, that didn't do it. Let me see here. 50 P. Come on, learn how to type. There you go. 50 px. We could do that instead of the 5%. So you could use percents, or you could use pixels, or you could use, now again, as a percent, that's the percent of the bounding element, which is this section. So actually, technically, that would not be the bounding element. It's 5% of this element. If you wanted to do 5% of the viewport height or viewport width, you would put that in instead. And like I said, you can also do pixels. So where we're going to do is we're going to start at a point of 0 and 5%. So now think of it this way. You got our rectangle here, and in this upper left-hand corner, we are at 0% and 0%. As we move over to the right here, we are staying at 0% as far as the y-axis, but we're going to 100% on the x-axis. And you always look at the x-axis first. So in this case here, our x-axis is 0, so we're all the way over here to the left-hand side. Again, it's always x-axis with horizontal first, y-axis second. So we are over here, 0 on this upper left-hand corner, 0 on the x-axis, and down 5% on the y-axis. Then if we came all the way over to this corner over here, we would be 100% x and 0 y. Over here it would be 100 x and 100 y. And over here in the bottom left-hand corner, because we're back over to the left-hand edge, we would be at 0x and 100% y. So in our case here, what we're saying is we're going to say start down here 5%, then come out to the middle of our x, 50% of our x, but go back up to 0 on the y-axis. So it's going to give us this little arrow up. Then we're going to come over here. We're going to drop back down by 5%, so 105. Then we're going to drop down to this bottom right-hand corner, which we said was 100, 100. And then we're going to finish up by going over to the left bottom corner of 0 and 100%. And then it automatically returns itself at the end back to here and draws out the entirety of the box. Now, what if you want to put a complementary little angle at the bottom? Well, here's the code for that angle, but if I turn it on, it killed the top one because it's always going to take the second one in the list. Well, that's not good that it killed the top one. So what I did is I made one where it put in both. So I basically all I did, let me pull this up so I can resize it. So all I did is I took essentially the code for the second one and I just put it in with the first one, and then what we did is we created the peak at the top here, and then we got the peak at the bottom down here as well. But what you're also going to see is this blue that is the background of the page showing through at this point. So what you can do is we can come over here and we can say, let's go up minus 50 pixels, and it comes up behind it. Let me get out of there. Now, in a case like something like this, you got to be really careful because, like I said, generally speaking, lower code goes over the top of upper code. In this case, it didn't do it. But if I had a row inside of that lower section, that row would come up and be proud and go over the top of this. So you gotta just check it out. If in that case, if this went over the top of the black background, what we would do is we would put in a Z index on this element. Let me just show you that. We put in a Z index, and we normally start off as 9 or something like that, because the standard Z index on a page, all the elements on the page all have a Z index of 1. And what's Z index? Well, like we said, we got X, we got Y, but then we got Z is front to back. Z is 3-dimensional. Think in terms of like working on a Word document or something like that. And let's just tell it to save. Working on a Word document, you will tell it to push something backwards or bring it forward. That is exactly what we're doing here with the Z index of 9. So that would pull this dark section here that we're working on, that would pull that in front of all the other sections on the page, and so nothing would want to go over the top of it unless, of course, it had a higher Z index number. And so, man, these 2 lines of code that Doug had in there, they don't do anything either. But what we can do, because all elements inside of ClickFunnels start off with a position of relative, and let me turn off my timer. And the z-index in that case was not, well, I guess we ended up using it down here, right here, but that was just purely an example. So now the one last thing I said to myself is, well, we got the peak up here and the peak there on the arrow. What if we came in the same amount, that 5% on either side? And so that's what I did there, is I came in with 5% right there. And let's see how that looks. Let's scroll this up a little bit on the page. Let's kill our CSS. And but again here, so now I see a little issue we have here as well. So now this white that we pushed up behind there, that you're seeing the little peekaboo of it right there. So that's one of the issues you got to deal with whenever doing something like this, is where is that background color going to peek through? Now, if I just left it as white, it would be fine. We wouldn't see it. It'd be the same as everything else, but that's not really the real world where you're going to have stuff peeking through like that. So that's what I have. I just wanted to go through a few things that Doug had here. So again, my big takeaway on this is if you get a share funnel for somebody, check to make sure what is in the CSS and what is in the tracking code, because who knows what could possibly be in there that might mess up your page. And then also, let me kill this out of here. And then also, when you're out there and you're finding stuff on the web, again, just be careful, ask around, get somebody who knows what they're talking about to take a look at it for you, just to make sure that your page works and looks as you want it to. So that's all I have for today. If you got any questions, just let me know.